And we have three very able panelists who are going to be able to explore this for us. We have Sajjad Hamid, who is a family business advisor here in Trinidad and Tobago, Ali Matalon, who is joining us from Jamaica, and Ceronne Bayley, who is a governance advocate and a business owner here in Trinidad and Tobago as well. And our moderator for this session is Simone Wittier. And Simone, too, as she has shared earlier, is herself an entrepreneur looking to start a family business that she hopes is going to be, you know, a legacy, 2 and 3 generation down the road for her family. So I will introduce Simone briefly and then ask her to take over the panel as she introduced her panelists. So Simone is an attorney at law, a certified mediator, an entrepreneur, a wife and mother. Her career began in the University of the West Indies, where she had worked as a research assistant, a tutor, and a part-time lecturer. And she has worked across all 3 arms of the state, including Parliament and the judiciary. She has also worked in private sector and civil society with migrants and refugees. She's an active member of the executive boards of the Scouts Association of Trinidad and Tobago, as well as the Association of Female Executives of Trinidad and Tobago, where she serves as the chair of the Public Relations Committee. She is also the Director of Research and Advocacy with that organization. And we are very proud that she's a member of the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute, and from time to time, the face of the Institute, as she shares the opening remarks with me for many of our public sessions. So Simone, I'm very happy to have you moderate the session, and I hand over the virtual floor to you now.
Thank you very much, Kamla. And as usual, I'm so happy to be here with you and the rest of the team and the CCGI family, because I think everybody that shares a love for this topic, I think we all can agree that, you know, it's like a family now. And I really do look forward to these sessions, even when I'm on vacation, right? So I want to start by welcoming the 3 panelists. And we have 1 gentleman with 2 ladies this afternoon, yeah? So we have Sajjad, who asked Kamla would have, I'm going to just do a brief introduction because I think their credentials speak for themselves and you all could always read more about them in the package. But he is, of course, a SME and family business advisor, and he's also a lecturer, yes, at COSTAT, and a man who's very credentialed in his own rights. And I look forward to hearing from him this afternoon as well. We have Ms. Matalon, Ali Matalon from Jamaica, so welcome. And she's a social impact leader, connector, and entrepreneur. And she's the founder and CEO of CoopCare, a social impact consultancy headquartered in Kingston, Jamaica. And we have our very own Ceronne Bayley, who is a member of the CCGI as well, who you often see too. And of course, she is a corporate governance professional, having been a CorpSec for herself for many years. And she's the lead corporate governance consultant of her own consulting firm, Ceronne Bayley's Consulting Services. And I understand, like today, like Kamla, I learned that she also has another business that she's involved in. So I'm really looking forward to hearing all 3 of you discuss these ESG metrics and how we can apply them to SMEs and our own family-owned businesses. So I want to ask the lone gentleman to start us off by telling us about these ESG metrics and his own opinion, and just briefly about how they can be applied. And I'm going to ask each presenter thereafter to start off in a like manner. So
I just want to say that I'm not an expert at ESG, but what I could say is that the SMEs, we have to understand the perspective of the SMEs. Now, larger companies probably would have embraced the environmental and social things in their governance structures, but smaller companies, it is actually very new for them because, you know, when you go to these smaller supermarkets, for example, I would ask them, what do you do with the spoiled food? And they would just dump it, right? And in Trinidad, I know about the other Caribbean islands, we dump a lot of stuff. There was some research done that says that that 85% of our waste could be recycled. Now, I didn't know that this had gone so far until I reflected on my life. And 20 years ago, we had a bucket under the kitchen counter, right? And I would put stuff in the bucket because I have a garden. I'm a gardener, so therefore I have a sustainable family, I think. and I would put the waste there, right? And I would try to encourage other people, but I noticed on my street, for example, people toss away a lot of stuff. They tend to be poor, but they toss away a lot of things. My point is that sometimes like supermarkets, and I come from a bit of a supermarket background, is that small companies sometimes toss away things that are, the trash and treasure sort of thing, right? And they should try to measure what is it they're throwing away. Maybe there's some money in that they're throwing away. Another thing, we throw away a lot. And in Trinidad, we waste a lot of water, right? We just waste water because water is approximately free in Trinidad. And when you go to the Hyatt in Trinidad, I noticed something which other companies don't do, is that the water barely comes out of the tap, right? And the reason why is that water is very expensive for them. And so that's one of the things that they do. So what companies have to do is that they have to measure, because if you don't measure, like let's say a waste, and I'm dealing with the environmental part, there's the social part. If you don't measure it, as a same management, you can't manage it. So you're going to measure what are some of the things you throwing away, and what are some, let's say, a carbon emission. Now you might say, how do you measure carbon emission? Well, you can look at the electricity bill, and I know that's not a total figure. So things like that will help you measure, and therefore you can manage it, right? And put policies in place. And plus you have to educate people, because in Trinidad, I don't think many people care about the environment. We care about the environment when we have a big flood, but it just doesn't happen. I hope that was a good answer for you.
Certainly, and it gives us some context because, like you said, most of us at Small Business People are not ESG experts. So I'm going to turn to our next panelist, Ali, to bring her own views and, of course, her expertise to the discussion as a brief introduction. Ali?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Simone, and so lovely to meet all of you and share the panel with so many esteemed speakers. So it's really great to be here, and I've been enjoying all the conversations this week. And love that we're able to be having these conversations in the Caribbean through an ESG lens. So my background is, much more specifically in the ESG consulting space. I'm the founder and CEO of CorpCare, and it's been a little bit of a challenge getting to this place, right? Because I think, as Sajjad said, that a lot of our family-owned businesses and our SMEs across the Caribbean are very focused on CSR and community investment work, but making this transition towards, specific adherence to environmental, social, and governance criteria has been particularly challenging. So it's really encouraging and exciting to be in a space where we're talking about that. We have three kind of ways of approaching this at CorpCare. We look at, education and awareness. We look at strict ESG consulting, and then we look at project management or implementation of social impact projects. But one of the things that I find super useful to think about in the context of small businesses in particular, or family-owned businesses in particular, when it comes to aligning themselves with ESG metrics, is to do so from a value-based perspective. So looking at the company's core values, and really aligning those to metrics that make sense. Of course, they're not required to report in the way that publicly listed companies, in the US or in Europe, for example, are required to report. But I think that we should all be thinking about ESG reporting in the same way that we think about financial reporting, and including those non-financial metrics in our annual reporting. Because truthfully, what gets measured, gets done, right? So if we're constantly tracking things year over year, we're able to make meaningful improvements on them. One of the things that, I come from a family business background. My family has a group of companies based in Jamaica, ICD Group. I'm one of the few that's gone off and done my own thing. But it has been passed from generation to generation. And sometimes what happens is that you end up having a culture of community investment that's very much aligned with the leadership at the time, as opposed to the company values. And so what we've actually tried to implement in our own family business environment is a CSR policy or an ESG policy that is, core value aligned and makes sense for our business streams as well, right? So you want to be investing environmentally, socially, and from a governance perspective in the communities that you exist and operate in, and the people who will ultimately become your employees, who will become your customers, and so on. So I'm really excited to dive, more deeply into this. I think GRI is a great framework for us to talk about today because it's a very general framework. Whereas, SASB, for example, has much more industry specific types of reporting regulation. I see Simone is doing a lot of nodding, so hopefully I'm onto something here. And we can dive deeper into it. But the last thing that I wanted to say, which I think will be incredibly useful for our conversations to come, is that the ISSB earlier this week actually just released a set of standards called S1 and S2, which will ultimately become accounting frameworks for environmental, social, and governance accounting. And I think that this will completely change the ball game in the sense that governments will have a lot more background and a lot more impetus to implement regulation in accordance with these standards, because now there's a language attached to it, and there's more universal and unified metrics that make sense across these various frameworks and ratings agencies, which can just become so cumbersome and confusing, especially for our SMEs, right? So hopefully having this language will start to make it feel a little bit more like financial reporting.
Thank you so much, Ali, for that context, because that was, you touched on something that we're going to go into deeper, as you said, because that was one of the, I have a list of questions in front of me here that I was going to ask the panel. So thank you very much. So Ceronne, I'm going to turn over to you. And you can go ahead and give your perspective, and then we're going to dive into some of the questions I had based on what you said, what you all share. So Ceronne.
Thank you, Simone. Hello to Ali and Sajjad. I'm very happy to be part of this panel, in particular, ESG metrics, applying ESG metrics to SMEs and family-owned businesses. I think Kamala had originally asked me to be a panelist on another forum, but I specifically requested this one because I think I'm in a unique position. I'm the owner of 3 family-owned businesses, and I also consult a lot with family-owned businesses. Many of my corporate clients are actually family-owned businesses, small sizes, and including micro entities as well. Right? So one of the things, before I even get into applying ESG metrics, and I'm a proponent for ESG, I completely believe in its value to the growth of businesses and to the growth of companies. But one of the things that I've noticed in my own space as a family-owned business leader, as well as with my clients, is that there's a need for a mindset shift, right? Particularly with new business owners, the micro entities, business who are now getting into this space. There needs to be a shift between a worker mentality and a leader mentality. Yeah, because a lot of the people I noticed, specifically the small business owners or the micro entities, they're still thinking as a worker, and they're still driving their businesses on their own. So there's no real professionalization, as we spoke about in some of the previous discussions, right? So until we start to really go outside of ourselves and get the professionals to advise us, where we are not doing everything, then we may never see the value of ESG metrics. For me in particular, that's one point I want to make. The second point is that you cannot underestimate the global trends in ESG. Ali just spoke to them, to some of them. I pay attention to what is going on in the EU, in the UK, in the US, right? In the EU, we have a Corporate and Social Responsibility Directive. And yes, the larger companies are required to do all this ESG reporting and whatnot. But while we may not, as Ali rightfully said, we may not have to report as much as they do, we can still learn from what they are doing because there's value in it. There's value in, and not just from an environmental perspective, from the social perspective, from the governance perspective. How do we treat our people? We don't have to be large to treat our people well. We don't have to be large to govern ourselves as a proper board, to lead by example. I was sitting with a client recently and helping them develop a corporate governance policy, because that is big now, is particularly with the companies in the insurance industry. They're now required to step up their corporate governance game. And so I'm helping this client with a corporate governance policy, and we're talking about the composition of their board. And many of them I get pushback. As Sajjad said, it's difficult. It's a challenge to bring up ESG and these topics with small businesses. You get pushback. So, you know, just one example, we're talking about the composition of the board, and the board is only men. You know, and I'm bringing up this whole issue of diversity, which is a part of ESG, part of governance. We're now looking at, again, the global trend toward diversifying your board, you know, and the comment was, well, we hire a lot of women. Yes, there's a lot of women in the staff, right? But there's a lot, the middle management has a lot of women, but the board doesn't. So there seems to be a ceiling there. So all of these things are part of ESG, and I think small business owners and even micro entities, as small as you are, you could still instill some ESG metrics, right? The family-owned business that I'm in, we are micro. When you can look at the size and number of employees and balance sheets or whatnot, we will be considered micro. But you could limit unnecessary printing. You don't have to print everything. You know, you could switch off a light, you could switch off the AC. There are different things that you can employ as part of your ESG metrics and establish it and measure it, both the quantitative and the qualitative. You know, so I think there's a definite need for a mindset shift away from worker to leader. And even when you're running your own companies, understand that ESG metrics is important for growth. And it's either you're in it just to do something fast, or you're in it to build something that lasts. That is what I say. If you want to build something that lasts, you're going to need ESG. So that's my 2 cents for now.
Thank you very much. I see Ali clapping. So let's drill down a bit, and yes, you second that. So I'm going to ask you all, now the thing is, we started the discussion with the presupposition, the assumption that everybody here knew what ESG was. Yes? Okay, so Ali, I know this is your area of expertise and very passionate about this. So I want you to tell me the what and the why. If you had to sell, now Ceronne's point, I mean, is well taken in that a lot of the smaller businesses, and I know, Sajjad also mentioned it as well. A lot of the smaller businesses are not necessarily interested in it. They do not see the value. They do not understand the relevance for a number of reasons. So Ali, this one goes to you first. I want you to explain the what and the why of ESG. What ESG is in one sentence, if you had to explain it to a small business or many people in this room, and why do you need it? As succinctly and as briefly as you can. Why do we need it? And then we're going to go into the what of it in terms of the deeper into the substance, and then the actual metrics that we can use under the environment, sustainability, governance sections. I think that's how we can approach it. Yes? So Ali, over to you.
Okay, no pressure. I think if I were explaining it in one sentence from a sell perspective, it would probably be different than an academic sense, right? So from an academic sense, I would probably say it's a collection of sustainability metrics that helps us to benchmark ourselves against our competitors and how we impact the world around us, right? From a sell perspective, I think that ESG is a set of criteria that we can use also to benchmark ourselves against our competitors, but actually to measure the return on investment in our community and what it means for the profitability and long-term sustainability of our business. Does that answer, is that the first part?
That's the first part, but you just raised something there, and I'm a bit mischievous, so you'll get used to me. Do you all agree with her explanation, the two other panelists? I can
validate it.
I want to ask Sajjad to jump in here. Do you agree with that in terms of because I found it was a very good, especially the academic sense of it, very, very good description. Do you agree?
Well, in Trinidad, we would say that she boil the dictionary and drink the water.
Oh, no. Okay, well, then you simplified for me.
Right. So me, I look at it this way. A company there's a human, how should I call it? Social justice, where you must incorporate the human part of it, which is the S. And then you must, I don't have a definition, but you must understand to protect the environment. And if you don't protect the environment, how is your next generation? You can make profit now, and maybe you damage up the environment. and then the next generations, they wouldn't have a good place. So the legacy, there's a legacy issue here of the environment being passed on to the next generation. And I'm going to say this is that the kids in Trinidad in primary school know more about climate change than the older people. In fact, my kids talk about climate change and their grandfather talks about global warming. He doesn't say global warming. He doesn't know. He calls it global warming. And I try to explain that to them. I said, at my age, I can't learn that kind of thing, you know. So, but I want to point out is that since I come from the education business too, right? There's a lack of knowledge by the average person, even business people, about things like what is climate change about. They don't know. Like a friend of mine is cutting out. I said, what are you doing now? I hear a noise about. He said, cutting on a tree. Julia mango tree. That's one of the favorite mangoes in Trinidad. I said, but you just have flooding a lot. He said, yeah, but the branches are rubbing against the roof. And you had to cut the branch all the time, right? I said, but we could have pick up the mangoes and give it to, you know, have a lot of poor people out there. Well, even in a high class area, right? And he said, you don't have time to dry, there's too many mangoes and all that. I said, oh my goodness, and he cut down the tree. I said, well, good luck this rainy season. You're going to have more flood again, right? Now I know, now this is on the individual level, on the business level. I admit I had a mango tree in front of our house and we had to cut it for the equipment to come in. But what I did was I replaced it with 2 mango trees, right? So now I have a mango tree from Guyana called Buxton Spice, and I have what we call a starch mango in the back, right? Now my kids, unfortunately, I'm failing in the education areas that they don't want to pick any mangoes, right? So I think my line is this, is that people need to be educated first. Forget about metrics, because if they don't know anything about social justice, you know, you see Venezuelans, Trinidad, we have a lot of Venezuelans. And I see a company has hired some of them. And I don't know, maybe I go there just to talk to them to find how they integrate. And I say these people have really integrated nicely. And that is a good company to do business with, because I see he treats them well, because the lady actually runs the store and he tells me privately, even though she has a little language problem, she works better than a Trinidadian. Well, that's what he tells me. I'm not saying that Venezuelans are better than Trinidadians, right?
Thank you very much for that. And Ceronne, I'm going to go back to you, and then Ali here, we are coming back to you now to discuss the why of ESG. So Ceronne?
Yes, so just to follow on what Sajjad is saying about education, you know, a lot of the persons, I think I mentioned this at may have been in another session. Persons in my personal network, I know a lot of business owners, they're my personal friends, you know, we connect all the time. And it's important to learn your craft. It's important to learn your trade. And when I'm talking about learning your job, you are a business owner, and it's not necessarily, okay, you open a bakery. When I'm talking about learning your crafts, I'm not necessarily speaking about learning how to bake. You need to learn how to run a business. So just from that education, you start from that point, you're going to be introduced to certain things. I feel really humble and fortunate for being able to, for what I was exposed to in corporate life. You know, that those years in corporate life, being in boardrooms in the public sector and state sector, really was so advantageous to me now as I'm building my own business. But not many people have that benefit. So, but it's important to learn your craft and get persons around you who you can learn from. Surround yourself with people that you can learn from, so you can start to appreciate things like ESG, you know. And like I said, you don't have to be large, you don't have to be listed, you don't have to be one of the companies that have to do all of this ESG reporting and all of these things. You could start where you are. Reduce, reuse, recycle. I think Kamala is always talking about reuse, reuse, reuse. You know, we could start as small as you are with in whatever circumstance that you have. And you know, that's my take on it. Regardless of your size, micro, family-owned SMEs, you don't have to limit yourself. You can start where you are. Because
Thank you.
next generations, sorry, Simone.
No, you go ahead.
Some clients ask me, well, what does this really, a lot of them say, I'm too small for that. I hear that all the time, I'm too small for that, right? But think about the people that you are hiring, the young people, right? Some of these clients have young people. And what are they looking for? What are they looking for now? They are looking for a stable company that is going to last. Yeah, they are looking for a company that cares about them. They are looking for a company that cares about the environment. And some of these young people, they're not going to keep quiet about it, right? They're not going to take bad treatment as employees, you know? So it's something you have to pay attention to, even for profitability. Ali spoke about profitability is linked to long-term sustainability. Someone in the session before spoke about that. They're not separate, right? For us to be sustainable and grow, we need to be profitable, right? We're going to need investments. I was speaking to my husband, the company, family-owned companies that I run with my husband. We need to be looking for external investors. And he was like, oh my God, you know, so what are investors looking for? There's certain things that they want to see, you know, and these sort of things is what they want to see. And you're not just doing it to get money or to get the investment. You're doing it because you genuinely want to grow.
Simone, I know you wanted me to
Yes.
finish up that.
Yeah.
I actually think that
Yeah.
what Ceronne said was perfect. Around 2 points she raised was young people and investment. And in terms of making the case for ESG or making the case for sustainability or kind of whatever you want to call it at whatever stage you're at in your journey towards building a sustainable, successful business, I think, you know, thinking about this is really important to not just attract young people to work at businesses that are going to last, but also to work at businesses. You know, I think the statistic is that 50% of millennials and 60 or 70% of Gen Z will not work at organizations whose values don't align with their own. And that's really, really important, right? In attracting young, talented talent to your organization, no matter your size, right? Because you want people who are really equipped to build your business. So attracting that talent and also retaining that talent. Robust, you know, investment in your social infrastructure, your sustainability infrastructure, pays its dividends in decreasing employee turnover by up to 37%, depending on how much of an investment that you make, right? These are really important statistics for small businesses who actually can't afford to rehire, retrain individuals all the time. And I think also from an investment perspective, if you are a small business, even if you are a family business seeking external investment, these are metrics that they are looking for. I mean, you know, I think everyone does their best even to make small investments towards building a more sustainable world, particularly people on a call like this. I use an investment platform that's dedicated exclusively to women. And they give you an option at the outset of your sign up with the investment platform. Would you like to invest exclusively in ESG rated funds or in a diversified, you know, in some other diversified portfolio? And, you know, if you're given the option with the exact same return, investors are going to pick the one that has the social return as well. And typically you find that companies that are, you know, have better corporate governance, have greater social investments, have better environmental stewardship, they are the ones that investors deem as lower risk in terms of making an investment in, right? Their company is more sound. It's a much more risk averse investment for them. So I think that, you know, for me, the case makes itself because I would like to see a world in which businesses contribute to, you know, a better environment, you know, more sustainable communities, better education infrastructure, all of that. So on a personal level, the case is made, but from a financial perspective or from a business case, I think there's so many statistics out there that make the case for us as well. That this is just, you know, businesses that do good. Our slogan at CorpCare is businesses that do good actually do better financially. So.
Thank you for that. So that covers the first two questions. Next question for you all. When should a SME or family-owned business in Trinidad, I know you all touched on it, but when do you think is the best time? Because you do have a lot of family businesses, even in the room, SMEs, who already started. And when they started, ESG was not a thing. Yeah. So what is the best way? When should they do it if they haven't started already? And then if they've already started, what is the best way to start to integrate it? I heard Ceronne speak about policies before, and I heard Sajjad talk about education. But I don't know if people leave the room with an idea. So, okay, this is how I could go about doing this, integrating this into my business processes and my business as a whole and my own value system, etc. So who wants to take that one first? Okay, I'll call names. I will ask Ali, I see you're muted.
I unmuted, so I'm happy to take it first. I didn't want to take it first since I spoke last, but but I think in terms of the when, you know, as soon as you feel you can. When I started our business, I mean, our focus obviously is working with businesses to develop their environmental, social, and governance strategies and implementation process. So we think of ourselves as a socially oriented business in that way. But we also need to, you know, walk the walk if we're going to talk the talk and ask businesses to do this. So it was a huge part of kind of our startup process was, you know, do we have policies around this? Where are our gaps? You know, what types of policies do startups typically have? And then which ones would we need to be, you know, more adherent to ESG criteria or, you know, in keeping with best corporate governance practices and so on. And that's still a work in progress for us. We're a small consulting business. So that's evolving, right? But so I think as soon as possible, I think it's a part of building that great foundation for your organization. The earlier you can start, the better. But as you said, I think so many businesses do it already, right? Especially so many of our Caribbean businesses. I think, you know, at least I find in Jamaica, our private sector is incredibly philanthropic, right? We have a lot of corporate philanthropy in the private sector of Jamaica. We saw this when COVID happened, for example. The private sector really stepped up in terms of public-private partnerships and so on. But the way in which they make those investments is not necessarily strategic, or those investments don't necessarily match, like, you know, value-oriented metrics, for example, right? And sometimes what ends up happening is we paint basic schools, right? Instead of maybe painting the basic school one year and then, you know, donating books the next year or something along those lines, right? So but in terms of a place to start, to answer your question a little bit more pointedly, I think, you know, we could start with a policy or an approach. The policy tends to codify the approach that you're going to take to this type of work. But the biggest lack that I see, which makes me feel compelled to suggest that this is where you start, is just start collecting whatever data you have. You paint the basic school, mark down how many employees were there, how much paint you used, how much it cost. All of those kinds of things. What kind of investment did you make? I make mention of this metric all the time because we work with a private equity firm, and one of their portfolio companies is a startup, and they track how many women get pregnant per year as a metric, which sounds like it doesn't make sense until you hear that it's a fertility company, right? So it's a success rate metric, but it's also a social impact metric, right? So it kind of falls into their world of social impact in terms of the metrics that they keep, and it's a unique metric. So don't rely exclusively on these frameworks to find metrics. If you have unique metrics that are within your business that really impact people, I mean, people who can't get pregnant, trying to get pregnant and have success using your product, that's incredible. And that's something that you should document as a part of your story as an organization. So data is where I would say to start if you can. Any systems that you use to track your financial data, use them, leverage them to start tracking your qualitative and quantitative ESG data.
Yeah. If I could add to that, Simone, when to start to where to start right now, you know, so micro, small, wherever you are, start right now. For example, with us, right? Part of our strategy is to keep costs down. Yeah, keep costs down and drive revenue up. So we are always looking at, for example, water consumption, energy consumption, how much I have to pay in this light bill, how much I have to pay on this water bill, you know? So these are things and that is a direct link to saving you money, right? And for us at this stage in our business, it is important for us to save as much as possible. Every cent counts as far as I'm concerned. So you look at your water consumption, look at your energy consumption, regardless of your size, you could look at that. I try to always push lead by example, which is a part of governance, under the pillar of G, the corporate governance aspect of it. So if it is that you are promoting we're going to turn green, we're going to be green, we're going to watch our carbon emissions. What kind of car do you drive? You know, are you driving an electric car? Are you invested into CNG? So lead by example, and the others will follow suit. So I think those are things to pay attention to. If you're pushing, your company is going to be promoting reduction in carbon emissions, and you need to observe how you yourself behave, and any company of any size could do things like that.
Sajjad, thank you, Ceronne.
Right. I just wanted to add as an example where to start. I think we live in a very complicated world. A lot of things, even experts, right? I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but let's say I'm an advisor, and let's say, well, an advisor in family business. Sometimes I'm shocked to know I didn't know a lot of things. In fact, I'm afraid sometimes when I wake up in the morning, there's something new happening. So let's see where to start. Let's say you're a family-owned business, and I'm not afraid to say, I didn't know that, So let's say you own a family business, and let's say you're in the supermarket business, right? I'm using that because I'm sure everybody have been to a supermarket, right? And you're trying to figure out how should I reduce my waste, right? So one of the things that I pointed out before is that supermarket waste a lot of food. Now, if we notice how supermarkets are moving, is that long ago they used to sell ingredients to make a meal. So, ingredients to make a meal. So they sell you the flour, the rice, the whatever. Today, they seem to be moving to selling a meal. All right. And the trend, is continuing. And the reason why it will keep continuing is that people are time poor, and then supermarkets make more money from selling a meal and selling rice and flour. They don't make any money on that, right? So what they can do is that since they dump a lot of the produce, because people, when they touch it and they squeeze it, even if the produce is still technically good, they toss that away. So they could do two things. They either could use it, if they're preparing meals in a supermarket, they could use the things that is not sellable in terms of when you look at it, or they could give it to people, and it's the social aspect. There are people who cannot buy fruits. In Trinidad, it's hard to believe that a friend of mine, he lives on the street and he can't buy fruits. So when I pick up the fruits, I take it to him and he gets fresh fruits. So there are people that he could help. And this is good, you call philanthropy, where especially farmers can give to the people who can't buy fruits. They probably will not have come in the supermarket in the first place. But who knows, maybe down the road when they get out of poverty, they'll come and they'll shop there because you have them, right? Now, technology can go a long way. I've seen this and I was amazed with this, that there were supermarkets in Japan that they were to reduce their carbon footprint. Instead of bringing lettuce from 20 miles away into the supermarket, in the back of the back store of the supermarket, as where they normally store goods, they would use hydroponics and they would grow their own lettuce and other things. So when they grow it there, and I know how long it takes, maybe a month or so, right? It's much faster than open field, and they would bring it to the front. So the carbon footprint is much lower. And of course, hydroponics uses much less water than if you had an open field lettuce operation. I wouldn't doubt technology reach so far that you maybe when next time, maybe 5 years from now, you go to a supermarket and you can pick the strawberries straight off the shelf. Now you might say, well, you're pushing it too far. But I think we're going to get there, right? And these are the technology things that I am not aware of all of them, I admit that maybe like Price Smart, where you have things stuck in things high up in the air, also known as Costco. And you can go there and maybe you have stacks of lettuce and all this produce, and you go and just take what you want. And when you finish, then maybe they're planted back. I don't know how they're going to do it. So I think technology will, through technology, got us into this mess. You know, the automobile, for example, the internal combustion engine was a great invention. You know, if we didn't have that, we would have a Flintstone car. You know, Flintstone used to pedal with his foot. I don't know his name, Fred Flintstone. But that made life so sweet for us. And we could transport cargo, we could transport people, but it got us into trouble because of the fossil fuels. So maybe technology will also save us. But technology will only save us if we embrace it and incorporate it into our business. And I really hope that we do that in the future.
Thank you for that. Now, next question. In terms of the themselves, so we looked at the what it is, the why, you know, when, and are we going to talk about the how, you know. Now, under the ESG, that, and this is my understanding, and this is where I'm going to ask, he is. I'm going to ask Ali to help us with this a bit, and then we will each jump in. And please feel free to place your questions or comments in the chat so that we can raise it with the panelists as well, or you may feel free to raise your hand or put on your camera and ask a question. Going back to this, ESG. Now, from what Ali said the last time, I understand, and from my own reading, each sector has its own metrics. So that's what you would have been alluding to. But generally speaking, for a small business in the Caribbean, right, let's use our region as an example. Sajjad uses his experience with the supermarkets. You have small family-owned businesses. You have caterers, events planners. We have, you know, caterers, yeah. We have different sorts of companies here. We have people who provide, you know, let's say, small manufacturing goods or contractors or whatever. What sort of environmental matrices, should we use in terms of the metrics that we should use for each of them? Like, what are these? So for me, environmentally, are we going to look at, I don't know, like Sajjad mentioned, carbon emissions, you know, what are the sort of things we're going to look at under each of those settings? So let's start with the E, and then we move to the S, and then to the G. So Ali, I'll ask you to start us off, and then we move from there.
Sure, no problem. I think I alluded to it earlier. I think that GRI, the Global Reporting Index, is probably the most comprehensive, generalized reporting framework that we can look to for ideas. That being said, though, I think all of these frameworks that have ESG metrics are really challenging to use. You know, we have members of our team, all of us are certified ESG practitioners. We have members of our team who are certified GRI practitioners. We have, you know, people become very, very expert in these specific types of frameworks. And I think that's a really big barrier to entry for small or family-owned businesses that are trying to start up doing this process. And even we're seeing with large publicly traded companies who are doing this for the first time, doing a disclosure, in other words, really aligning yourself to a framework, is extremely difficult for the first year, right? It's oftentimes not done. So you wait until you have enough kind of data to really make a proper quote unquote disclosure, which is much more of like a legal process that's geared towards investors and so on. What I would recommend for smaller businesses would be, you know, look through some of those types of frameworks. I would stick with GRI for now. Or use, you know, for example, the World Economic Forum has this mapping technology where you can go in, you can create a profile, and you can say that your topic of interest is ESG, and maybe you're a supermarket, and you can say supermarkets, and it basically creates this web of resources for you in those categories, right? So using online resources like that to start to understand what's in the space, I think would be great. But just collecting the metrics that you have, that you would intuitively think are ES or G would be a great place. So, you know, I would intuitively think like, you know, my electricity usage would be something that I would think about. The amount of gas I use in my transport vehicles if I'm transporting things to and from my supermarket. Maybe if I really wanted to get granular, I would start thinking about my supplier's gas usage or electricity usage or my manufacturer's carbon emissions, right? That's our, if we're talking in technical terms, now we're getting into scope 2 emissions, right? I would focus on your scope 1 in terms of ESG for small businesses, right? You know, do you turn off the lights at night? Obviously you can't turn off the refrigerator, kind of what Ceronne was saying earlier. For social, I would look at the types of investment that you're making in your people that work for you before you even look at your external community. What's the gender breakdown across your organization? What's the race breakdown across your organization? Now, we don't have the same racial makeup that the US has, for example, where a lot of these metrics originate. So some of them don't make sense for our demographic, but we need to accommodate them to make sense for us. And that's a great place for SMEs to do that on their own and make sure that every group in society is represented to the best of your ability in your organization and proportionately so, right? Do employees have access to educational resources or training programs that can help them personally and professionally? Are there employee resource groups, things like that? And then from a governance perspective, you know, let Ceronne speak more to that, but just do you have a policy around any of these things? For example, maybe you have a recycling policy. Maybe it's a one-page policy, but you have a recycling policy and it says, this is where plastic goes, this is where paper goes, this is where metal goes, and we're going to adhere to that. And those are really robust metrics to keep track of, especially as a small business. And that lays an incredible foundation if you did grow into a massive business that was publicly traded that had to adhere to ESG metrics or frameworks moving forward, that you'd be able to do that. I know all of these answers are still quite complicated. And I think it's gonna feel complicated until we all start really speaking the language all the time, like we do about finances. But we know a lot of this intuitively. It's good business intuitively.
Thank you for that. So, Ceronne, and then we're going to go to Sajjad.
Yes, Simone, Ali made a point there, very interesting point, and it's something I sometimes tell my clients. She talk about sometimes a company might require your suppliers. You might want to look at your suppliers' ESG metrics. So even though you are not large, you might be supplying or you might be connecting with a large company that has these reporting standards, and they might not be requiring you to also do the same. So, you know, so that's just another argument to take ESG seriously. You know, even though you might not be directly required to report, the companies that you serve might require that you do, because they are required to report, you know. In terms of governance, you know, governance is such a large area. And because it really deals with how the board operates and the whole system of governance of a company. You'll find a lot of the metrics might be more qualitative, because you know there are quantitative and qualitative metrics. So in the governance, you might find more qualitative metrics. What are your ethical standards? You know, there might be you might be able to measure that with a particular number per se, you know, but what are ethical standards? What, you know, how your board is structured? How transparent are you? You know, how accountable are you? And which will tie into your annual report, what you put in your annual report, right? Even now in Trinidad and Tobago, we have a code, we have a Trinidad and Tobago Corporate Governance Code of 2013 is now being revised, you know, and companies are more and more that going to be required to report on certain things, on certain governance frameworks, their subcommittees, you know. A lot of my small clients resist these subcommittees, particularly family-owned businesses. They resist these subcommittees because you're now diving into the element of a non-executive director. You know, because you find independent directors are more involved in these subcommittees and they tend to resist that. But all of these things, how your board is structured as a whole is may have to be measured, be more qualitative in how you function. You know, so that's difficult, that's more difficult to measure, I think.
Noted. We're going to come back to that just now. Sajjad?
Right. Since I'm not the expert on metrics and all that, right? But there are simple things that you could do. So let's say you have an SME. Now you have to be careful with the word SME, the acronym SME, because the mediums are different from the small. So if you're a medium-sized organization, you could tell them, well, there's a problem with SMEs is that their board doesn't really function, from my experience. So legally they have a board of directors, but they hardly ever meet. And if it's a family business, sometimes they hardly ever meet, right? Because the management and the board is the same thing. So in family business, a good suggestion for most family businesses is to have somebody independent on the board, not only to be a sort of a kind of like, sometimes they get into a little quarrel, right? The normal family business, they get into a little quarrel, and you need somebody there who could kind of like a level head could kind of straighten them out and thing, right? So if you get somebody with that kind of expertise on the board, that would help, whether it be a family business or the M of the SME, right? Now, some M's are quite rich. They are cash cows, a lot of them the M's, and depends on how you define them. Now, if you go to a smaller business and tell them about all these governance things, I look at governance like the foundation in your house, right? And this might be the best analogy to use, but a foundation in your house has actually no sex appeal. Nobody, you wouldn't invite somebody and say, come and see my foundation. But you would say, look at my roof, look at the walls, and look at the windows and all kind of thing. Right? So when I was building, I tell my wife, well, you see the foundation, it's real nice. So she watch it and she kind of sweeps and all kind of thing, right? But if you don't have good governance, you have a good foundation in an earthquake or hurricane or whatever, everything come falling down, right? So to sell this governance thing to the small is going to be a hard sell, right? And take it from somebody who is in a bit of marketing. So what you may have to tell them is that they may not be able to afford an expert. So how would I, if I'm building my house, let's say that's our business, how did I go about doing it? I couldn't hire a structural engineer because I just didn't have the money for a structural engineer. So what I did was, and we have it even better now, you have artificial intelligence. So you could ask questions and see and do your own research. Because as an SME, you have to be a generalist and you find out how are you going to do all these things, right? So you search and you look, and so I learned that, when people build their roofs, they make it nice and pretty, but they don't anchor it down to the ring beam, and the ring beam is not anchored down to the foundation, which is the governance, right? The foundation. And so SMEs have to learn that maybe they can't afford an expert. Maybe they could do the research themselves, right? And they could put some things like your electricity bill and your water bill. Well, in Trinidad, residents will pay water rates. It's just, everybody just wastes water, right? But businesses are metered, and you could measure that. So for instance, I'm trying to reduce, this is a challenge, I'm trying to reduce the electricity consumption in my home. And I'm having a bit of a challenge because it's about the same, and sometimes I go up a little bit. So I call a meeting and ask them how to reduce it. So you may need to do this with the workers. I need to ask them, how do we reduce the electricity consumption here? Now, like in a supermarket, you can do this, is that a lot of the refrigerated equipment now are using inverters, right? Air conditioner using inverter technology, which I was told, Ali could tell me if I'm right here, it uses much less energy. So when you're replacing now, don't replace it with something cheap, you're just going to waste up outside energy. You could replace it with that one. So gain technology, right? Simple things like your taps, for example, in the kitchen, I know that is where the water consumption is, right? So I put in an aerator in the tap, which mixes the water and the air, right? And at the bottom, I have a valve, so they don't know this. I don't make homes, I don't want to say anything. I turn it low because we have a pump, because the water pressure is very low in Trinidad. So I know they're going to waste it. Plus, I didn't buy a big pump. I was going to buy a bigger pump, but I know they'll just pump out all the water, right? So those are the simple things you could do in your company, right? And maybe you could reward them. You could say, hey, if we reduce electricity and if you use the water consumption and whatever the measurement you're using, maybe we'll pay a bonus. So you make a profit, a bigger profit, because your cost is lower. And the employees now, for their efforts, they leave with something. And of course, when they go home also, they probably will do the same thing. They probably say, how do I reduce my electricity bill? And that's profit, not profit, but that's money that goes straight into their pockets. Right? So I think those are some of the simple things that you can use, but I think people could tap into this artificial intelligence. I just want to point out that today's article in The Guardian, I interviewed Kamala. I did not use artificial intelligence. That is straight. That is not Betty Crocker style, right? I did that myself. But here what I did, just a little tip here for those who have knowledge-based business. I did use artificial intelligence to correct my grammar. Not that my grammar is bad, but you want to type in very fast. And it corrected my grammar, so I made sure that I didn't make any mistakes. I hope I didn't make any mistakes. So if you read today's Business Guardian, you'll see Kamala is in it.
Thank you for that. And this leads me to the next question, and it kind of ties everything together. I was doing some reading on it, and we talked a lot about this week the greenwashing, yeah. And just based on what Sajjad shared and what you all were sharing, how can a SME kind of, or I want to say a small business, let's keep it to the small business, as Sajjad guided, there are different categories, a family-owned business, a small business. How could they guard against that tendency? Because if, like, you try to introduce some of these metrics that you are mentioning, greenwashing may become something that, human beings, and like you said, they use AI. I didn't want to talk about AI today, but I guess we're going to talk about AI today. How can a small business avoid the tendency for some people, in some instances, to greenwash, because then they would, I don't know, try to make the company more attractive for the investors, etc. How can they guard against that? And how can they basically police themselves? Is there a way to do anybody?
Just be honest. It all boils down to honesty and integrity. Don't exaggerate what it is that you are doing to attract investors. Just simply do not do it. It's wrong and you should not do it. So in terms of, resist temptation, of course, there are many temptations in business, yesterday we were talking about procurement and whatnot, and just know what is right to do. If it's your conscience and it is right, you do it. If conscience and it is wrong, you don't do it. Do not exaggerate your environmental contribution for whatever reason. So it's difficult for me to say how to resist it. Just do it. My husband gets mad with me when he said just do it. I was like, it's a reason Nike chose that. Just do it. Yeah, he's like, so how to do it? Just do it.
I asked that as a kind of teaser, but go ahead. Sorry, Ali, go ahead.
No, I said I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, it's greenwashing is cooking the books. If you think about it from a financial perspective, we'd never ask, how do I guard against cooking the books? You just don't.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I also think, yes, sure, maybe investors find companies that are sustainable more attractive, but we are not in such an aggressive enough ESG environment in the region to necessitate greenwashing for small businesses seeking investment, right? There's really no reason to do it. And as a small business, your environmental footprint is likely, not nearly as large as competitors in similar spaces as you, who are bigger organizations, obviously. It's once you're even trying in this space, you're doing well. So I think there's no real reason for it at all.
Sajjad?
Well, in Trinidad, we would call greenwashing a cock and a bull story, right? I don't know if you all are familiar with cock and bull story, right? So we have to assume in marketing, we says the customer is pretty smart, right? Because they're experts at buying, that's what they do. So if you fool them, you will lose credibility. And when you have a reputational risk, which I know we didn't talk too much about that, but when you have a reputational risk, let's say like Nike is buying shoes from a factory in China and people are to work 60 hours a week and they're paying them very low and they're stressed out and they're suffering with burnout and all that. And you say Nike is a great company. And we see it happen, I think, with Nestle. Nestle, we thought that the Nesquik, is the one you can't drink it fast or slow or something like that. I can't remember. And I think they found out, I don't know how true it is. I don't want to accuse them and be false here, that some of the cocoa was coming from farms in Africa and that little kids with cutlasses and they were cutting, and of course they were cutting their hands, they were maybe 6 or 7 years old. And that really put them in a jam, because we all thought, and maybe I think they were saying that everything was good and fine with the supply chain, but they still had these pictures of these kids and had to rush along here quick, and try to make sure they clean up this thing and source cocoa from farms where they didn't have kids working on it. Now you you might say, well, if I'm buying from companies, how do I know? I mean, let's say if you're buying, I'm not saying China is the only place, right? On the other places, how do you know? So you got to find out, right? An uncle of mine, he was buying from a company and he thought it was a great company. I told him, I said, no, those companies are not good because I heard about them, right? And then he investigated it and it was conflicting with his religious belief because they were discriminating against his religion, right? His thing. And then he had to decide, he had to buy from somebody 10% more. But as far as his conscience is concerned, he was much better off because he can't be praying in one hand and then the next hand he's supporting a company that is oppressing the same people, right? So I think the people are intelligent, and when you get them a cock and bull story, it will come back to haunt you. It could be like you're in an animal farm, you know, a cock, a bull, and an animal farm.
Thanks for that. And it's something that I'm often thinking about myself because ESG is fairly new, as we all acknowledge, at least in our part of the world. To your recollection, any of you, have you all ever come across any instances, any experience where these small enterprises have made attempts and have been very successful? Like, you know, is there something that you could draw upon, like an example where, you know, some of our participants here today could go back and say, let me go and research this company because they said this company used ESG to, you know, to good advantage, and this is how they did it. Is there any, like, let's say any sort of success story or case study that people could refer to?
In my fund, these small companies are now beginning to make an effort. It's kind of now starting, so I can't really say it's a success story yet. But as Ali said, you know, once you're thinking about it and you're in the space, that's a good thing. What happened in the insurance brokerage industry, in the insurance industry, because of the change in the legislation, the Insurance Act in 2019, they now have a lot of responsibility on concerning governance. So the central bank issued revised corporate governance guidelines to them, to these financial institutions, insurance companies, insurance brokerage companies. And so they are now looking to in strengthening their corporate governance framework. They are now starting to talk about ESG and things like that because they understand the link between the two, you know. So I can't really speak to a success story yet, but give us time and I'm sure we will have one.
Agreed. I think a lot of these companies are budding success stories. But there's a business that I often make reference to that's based in Jamaica that I think is a great success story just from a social business perspective. And there's, you know, lots of social enterprises that I think embody the values that we'd like to see, you know, when we're talking about sustainability or we're talking about ESG. And one of them is Def Can Coffee. It's a coffee company and it exclusively employs people who are hearing impaired. And they've had a really, really successful coffee business across Jamaica. I think that, you know, they're a really great business to think about just from their core practice is socially impactful, right? They identified a need in society and addressed two different ones, right? The need to drink a nice cup of coffee and the need for members of our community who are hearing impaired to have access to gainful employment. And so the inherent function of their business or the inherent product or service that they're providing is socially impactful. And I like to think about social businesses first when I'm thinking about small businesses as ones that are kind of ahead of the curve. And then I think, you know, we have lots of other organizations who are doing great work kind of along these lines. And I mentioned in the chat that I'll share some resources with Kamla after, if she could share with the participants. And one of the things that I wanted to mention earlier, Simone, when we were chatting about just access to resources for SMEs, is that at Corp Care and this is not a plug, this is genuine. I would like to provide people with access to these resources, but we're launching an impact circle where we're inviting, you know, 1 to 2 members of each organization for free to join us in demystifying ESG. So we'll provide like a monthly seminar on demystifying ESG. We'll provide a newsletter, access to keynote events and so on. And I think it's just a place to start thinking. So I will share access to that through Kamla as well. And we'll make it a point to share some success stories of SMEs in the space, if we have any
Excellent.
fully made ones.
Yes. And Simone, if I may add, what I noticed as well is even there are some companies who are doing things, who have been doing things that they may not recognize that they're employing some ESG measures. In company secretaries, for example, I'm a company secretary, and they are 10 to 15 years ago, the way we distribute board packs and board packages was all this set of paper, a big, huge package for every board member. So my 11 directors and a big, huge package for everyone. But now you have corporate secretarial software. There are companies that use board portals, but you eliminate all that paper. Even if you can't afford a board portal, at some point in time, I had stopped using the big paper packages and started emailing and any use of technology, as Sajjad had mentioned before, that could have an impact on the environment and make our work so much easier and faster. So you might be doing things even in your own space, and you may not recognize it's a ESG measure.
That's true. Sajjad, I know you work with a lot of these SMEs and small businesses. Yeah. I know we just kind of fleetingly mentioned risk a short while ago. How does that play into this entire discussion? Because that's something that I oftentimes in the literature I see it coming up, the issue of risk in this particular space. How does that come in? And of course, the rest of you could jump in here as well.
Right. Well, when I speak to SMEs, I tell them, well, I ask them about their business model, right? And sometimes they don't understand what the business model is, but I mean, they know how to make money and they are very successful. So I tell them there are three components essentially. Your business model must generate income, sales revenue, and it must also talk about the cost that you incur to generate that revenue. But the third part of your business model, which is often ignored, is the risk part of it. And this is why sometimes SMEs find themselves into trouble, especially startup stage, because the business is like a cash sponge and it is not so profitable. And then they get one bad event and then they go out of business. So when you come to, and I'm glad, I think it's Simone, you're in the insurance business. Is it you? I think, no, somebody's in insurance. No, okay, right. So SMEs generally, they don't believe in insurance, right? And remember, you have a lot of risk involved in the new environment we're in, with the climate change and all that. And sometimes you bring that up. And I know insurance doesn't cover everything, right? But at least it covers a lot to protect your assets. And they don't understand that at all, right? And it is crazy that you will have a situation where you have flooding. Flooding is probably one of the worst disasters you have, and that could wipe out your business. In Trinidad, maybe every time rain falls very heavy, you have a big problem, all right? So I think SMEs have a blind spot, and that blind spot in their business model is that they ignore the risk involved, right? So while you may not be able to replace your building, at least you should take out insurance, which is giving somebody else the risk, right? And it is a cost of doing business, but that's one of the ways to deal with the climate, the environmental impact from climate disaster is having insurance. But not only having insurance, you must also know how to visualize scenarios that if there's a hurricane. Now in Trinidad, we don't believe there's going to be a hurricane, even though I know we haven't had one since 1933 in Trinidad. In Tobago, it was, I mean, I research this because I teach Caribbean business. 1963 is when Tobago got hit by flora. So people in Trinidad, unlike Jamaica, in Jamaica, I noticed a friend told me he went there, and when he hear hurricane, he says, no problem, we'll buy a bottle of rum, no problem. But Jamaicans took that very seriously, right? He said kits and all this. I had a friend actually, he's a SME owner, and I called him, I thought he was in Trinidad. and it was in St. Lucia. And I said, in St. Lucia, it's the worst time. That was last week. He says, we are worried about, and I'm going to enjoy this hurricane, this tropical storm. I can't remember the name of the tropical storm right now. And he says, you're on top of this world. I said, be careful, you're not on top of a galvanized sheet, because when that thing go flying, right? So we don't take it very seriously in Trinidad. We actually in Trinidad, I would say we are very, not very, we don't care about some of those things, but I think down the road, our culture will change, because we used to have a descriptor called God is a Trinity, but people don't use that anymore again, right? I see that as dying now. So I think going back to the risk, SMEs don't manage their risk very well, and they're not like Massey, for example. Massey could handle a blow. If we have 25 stores or whatever they have, it'll lose a branch, they could probably build back a next branch, but if you're an SME and your factory goes, I think you're out of business.
Yeah, definitely.
Answer your question.
Yes,
Yeah,
So your
Simone.
risk in your business model is what they should be focusing on. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, Simone, I just want to agree with everything Sajjad just said. And I see some comments in the chat about reputational risk. And he made a valid point in that the small micro entities can't really weather storms as the large ones, as massive. And what I noticed during COVID in particular, a lot of my friends, again, colleagues, did not survive COVID, and pre-COVID, there have been certain policies and whatnot that I've been trying to help them with. But writing a policy is one thing. You have to actually apply the policy, right? The business continuity plan, you have to actually apply it. It's not just to make, let someone write it for you because she is the governance person. You have to actually apply the thing. So during COVID, a lot of them had to restart, get fresh starts. But one thing they learned from COVID is that now they're taking me a little more seriously. And so that you can apply these things and be able to weather better any kind of shock that might happen. I remember when I was registering my business, because it's Ceronne Bayley's consulting services, and I was a little nervous. I was like, I am putting my whole government name in my business. So I have to make sure that all my I's are dotted and all my T's are crossed, because my actual name is in my business. And some people say, sure, you want to use your name and whatnot. I was like, well, it would drive me to just make sure that it's above board and of high integrity and all of those things that I personally stand for. Because your name, as we heard, your name, the slightest thing, and somebody could just damage your name, damage your reputation. Whether it's true or not, once people believe it, your name can be damaged. So you have to have that foundation proper, right? ESG and all of these things will help you to guard against any unforeseen circumstance that might hit you, whether it's somebody attacking your name or a global pandemic or a flood or whatever it is. It's very, very important.
so what I just wanted to, I know we're running out of time now, so I'm going to try to be good and keep us on time. I'm not going to ask any more questions, just to open it up to the floor to see if anybody has any comments or any questions they want to ask before I hand over to Kamla so that we will be on schedule. Anybody have any questions, any concerns? Let me look over here in the chat. Let me look to see if anybody's hands is raised.
Yeah, no, there weren't any questions.
Okay,
in the
good.
chat. Yeah.
Good. All right. So what I'm going to do now to round off, I know we took, I took it from a very academic perspective, the what, the where, the why, the when, the how. Okay. So if you all could each just take, I'll give you a minute or two to just say what you would want if you had the opportunity to speak to a small business owner, somebody who's starting off, what you would want them to know about ESG, just a closing statement, like, what you want them to take away from this entire discussion, and then we'll hand back over to Kamla. Thanks. I'm going to ask Sajjad to start.
I was hoping you'd leave me last. Well, I got to think about
Oh,
it.
you want to go last? All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, well, let somebody go. Let somebody go. I could copy
All
the
right,
answer.
so You see, we just want greenwashing.
Right.
And it's not AI. We didn't go into AI today. Good. So Ali, I'll ask you to start there.
I'm AI, just drop off the L. So one sentence Simone, with these one sentence takeaways and one sentence discussions, you're really working us today. A one sentence takeaway from this conversation, I think, is that ESG is for everybody. It's not this exclusive set of metrics that are only to be used by large publicly traded businesses. I think that they can be a great framework for us to think about issues of corporate governance, social impact, and the contributions that we make to society. And I think that we can align them with the businesses that we hold as business leader, with the values that we hold as business leaders, professionals, entrepreneurs, and the ones that we instill in our organizations. And it's a great starting point for us to think about the issues that affect our business and the world around us. So I would highly encourage, everyone on the call to be thinking about it, and obviously, every SME to be thinking about it as they grow, because, we might not be talking about them as SMEs in 5 to 10 years time. So I really hope that was a takeaway from this conversation. And of course, if you have questions, they can call us at CorpCare.
I will be, trust me, I'm sure Kamala is going to circulate everything and the materials you're going to share. Ceronne?
Yes, I'm gonna say what I actually say. You either want to build something fast or you want to build something that lasts. If you want to build something that lasts, it's going to take some time, right? Nothing worth having it comes fast. It's going to take some time. But matters such as ESG, yes, it's going to be a road and a struggle to walk, but it's going to lead to growth and something that lasts for you. So that's what I would tell all the small business owners and micro business owners.
Thank you. And Sajjad, sir?
Right. So I had some time to ponder this. So I was thinking about it. If somebody's starting a business, right? A lot of time they think, maybe a year, 2 years, the company will start to make a profit and all that. And that's important, right? So I tell them, frequently your business will end up being a family business. And that's one way to make it into a legacy business. But legacy business is one, but you also want to make sure that you understand the world that we live in. We are mashing up this planet at a rapid rate, right? Our generation and the next generation will get a gift from us if we continue like this. And they will get a gift of maybe the hurricane season will be 12 months of the year. Maybe we'll always have flooding and we'll have this and we'll have droughts and all kind of thing. So when you build a business, make sure your business will contribute to a better world, right? So when your kids take over the business, and I hope it becomes a family business, and most SMEs are family business, over half of them, is that you want to hand them a business that they could be proud of, and they could reflect on the founders, which would be you, I suppose, who are now, they're going to be the heroes in the family, where you put a picture up and say, when they started this business, they weren't destroying the planet. Maybe they didn't have an SUV. I like to pick on people with the SUVs. Sorry, everybody, right? They didn't have a big house and they didn't do this and they didn't mash up this, right? They lived a life and they were way ahead of the time. And they're just like some of our leaders from 2000 years back. You could still talk about them, right? So I would tell somebody, when you're starting a business, think the next generation, so you could become a hero in the eyes of your children and grandchildren.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I want to say thank you to the presenters. I know I didn't give you an easy time of it this afternoon. I was asking a lot of questions. And I want to say you all were very good sports, and I learned so much from each of you. I'm going to hand over to Kamala again. I want to say thanks for the opportunity to meet these lovely people and to share with you and to learn more about it. So I'm going to hand over to Kamala. I went on the schedule. I made it. Guys, we did 7 minutes. Yes. 7 minutes to spare. So Kamala, I think we did a good job. So I'm handing back over to you. Thanks so much.